I'm putting it right here. I want to make, I'm on, where's your, yeah, you're good.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Benedict Lecca, the Executive Director, your friendly librarian. I want to welcome you all this evening to a special event. In celebration of our 275th, this is just another event. We've had many this summer. And it's also the second time that we are using this newly renovated space with all of the extra chairs. And so we're thrilled to have Mr. Duchin and Mr. Merrill here this evening. And I'm going to pass it on now to Miss Kitty Cushing, who we've been working with to put this together. So I want to thank her and Mr. Duchin and Mr. Merrill and all of you for coming. Thank you.
It's really an honor to be working with the Redwood Library, and thank you so much for hosting this event. I'm so honored to introduce Peter Duchin, who is an old family friend of both my father and stepfather and many of my family. Minnie may be here tonight. He has a long history in Newport. His mother grew up in Rosebud. It's a fascinating story for those of you who haven't read the book. But he's brought so much magic to us here with his music. And there was an event for him in Long Island at Piping Rock Club, and I thought, Peter has got to come to Newport. Newport is really a place that would just love to have you come back and bring back your magic. And the minute Bob Merrill heard about this, he said, I'm coming. I've been dying to do a podcast of Peter Duchin. He's an old friend, and Bob Merrill is an amazing musician himself. He is the radio talk show host for Legends Radio in Palm Beach, 100.3. And he is going to be your host, or to have a conversation with Peter Duchin. Welcome, both Peter and Bob.
Thank you. I don't need that. Well, greetings, everybody.
Well, greetings. Do you hear me? Yes.
Can you hear me? Yes. Well, I met Peter Duchin about 40 years ago.
When I was a child, yes.
Exactly. You got a few years on me, but I was just getting out of college, and my folks had a place in Jamaica next door to your in-laws when you were married to your first wife, Sherry Zauderer.
That's right.
And I remember we played doubles together, and we got on great. You came over for dinner with Sherry, and I was talking about life playing jazz, and we talked about jazz. You started to tell me great stories about being in Paris when you were taking a year off at Yale and playing with jazz greats like Lester Young and all manner of hanging out in those caverns. And in Paris, all those clubs are in those caverns, right? You were living on a barge, and there's some great stories on that. And we've run into each other over the years. I've always admired you tremendously because I, too, am a musician playing the trumpet and some piano and sing and a band leader. I moved down to Palm Beach for good about 3 years ago, right before the pandemic, and I went on radio on Legends Radio 100.3. You can get it all over the world with the Legends Radio app. And during the pandemic, there were no gigs, so it was great being able to bring the music to people through the airwaves that were in the lockdown. And I started in March of 2022, and in March of 2022, you got COVID-19.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And so I'm going to throw it over to you, but I want to ask the question. You wrote a wonderful book called Ghost of a Chance back in '96 when you were, I think, almost 60 years old. And then this one, that's over half a century. This book covers the last quarter century. What motivated you to write Face the Music?
Well, it was simple, actually. I did a lot of kind of as surgery, not surgery, but I'd go to gyms and whatnot.
Physical
And-
therapy.
and physical therapy, and I did a lot of that. And I noticed that a lot of people had given up who were in physical therapy. They'd given up, and I started throwing balls at them and whatnot, and they perked up, and then I threw other things and batted them and whatnot. They perked up, and it suddenly occurred to me that if they read something by somebody who had the same problem they did, which was a stroke in my case, and COVID in a doubly. And if it occurred to me that if I could enunciate what it meant to me, it might help them. And that's why I wrote the book. There was another reason I wrote the book, is when I got home, finally, from the rehab, I found that my wife had moved a bed into my office. And in the office, I had a bunch of photographs of my father, my mother, and all sorts of things, mostly them. And I had written about them in my first book, but I didn't know them. I mean, your mother I knew, and what would you think if you passed your mother and she didn't recognize you? That would be the question of my mother. My mother was simply died when I was born, and so she wouldn't know what I was like. I didn't know what she was like. So when I was recouping in that bed that my wife had put in my study, I thought about what my mother was like. She was from Newport, by the way. And what my dad was like, who was from Cambridge, Mass. And very different backgrounds. Dad was a band leader. He was not Tyrone Power, by the way. And my mother was not Kim Novak, but not bad if she had been. But I thought that I should really sort of look at the situation from a very sort of analytic point of view and figure out what they were really like. And that's what I tried to put in this book.
Well, let's talk for a minute about Eddie Duchin, because he was a superstar. For those people that have heard some of the great records, like, what was Old Man Mose? Wasn't that one of his big hits?
I kicked the bucket, yeah, man. Buck, bucket. But that wasn't what they sang.
I read in your book that he had his hands insured for $150,000 by Lloyd's of London back in the 30s. That was a lot of money back then. Did you ever have your hands insured?
Well, no, but I'll tell you about Old Man Mose. It was his biggest hit record. And they were, it was acetate then that they made. And when they went, oh man, and kick the bucket, yeah man, bucket. Well, the girl singer finally got bored and changed bucket to F.
Don't say.
And they let the record out, and it was played for quite a while until people really caught on that she'd said the word, and so that helped out.
I've played that record on the radio. We're going to get shut down by the FCC because of this.
Listen and you'll hear fuck it.
Do we have a bleep machine back there? That is wild, but...
You know who wrote that song? Louis Armstrong.
No kidding. He wrote a lot of the good old good ones that he said. But you told me, you didn't tell me, you wrote in the book that you were once slightly embarrassed when your dad played, I think, at Eaglebrook, because you were into Count Basie, and you didn't think your dad really swung that hard. And
Well, I was, I liked jazz. I liked Basie, I liked Ellington, and Dad came up and played romantic, wonderful piano. I mean, he played much better than I do. He had a great technique, and it was all for dancing and that kind of thing. But it wasn't swing. It wasn't jazz. And I dug jazz, and so I once went to the Strand Theater to hear him play, and I walked up to get his autograph afterwards, and I sort of put up the piece of paper, and he said, "Love, that's Waller," who I loved as a player.
oh, that's a great story. I didn't read about that in the book.
Well, I don't tell everything. Almost.
You know, there's so much to unpack with Peter Duchin's story. And I don't know whether to sort of go chronologically or to throw some non sequiturs at you. Tell us about hanging out with Frank Sinatra and going to see Don Rickles and what you guys did.
Talk about a non sequitur.
Yes.
Well, Frank, I was playing in Miami at a place called the Fontainebleau, and an interesting hotel indeed. And Frank was playing at the Eden Rock, and he called up and said, "Let's go." Rickles is opening at the Deauville or something. "Let's go throw pies at him." I said, "What the hell are you talking about pies?" He got a bunch of pies in a vehicle, in a limo, a stack of pies, and we all go in.
And who was in the group? You, Sinatra, and there were a whole bunch of other people.
Shecky Green and a bunch of us were in, and we sort of snuck in the back with pies, and we threw them at Rickles, and it caught him right in the face, which was kind of interesting. Rickles said, "Oh God, Sinatra's here."
I think everybody loved it.
Sinatra was a wonderful man in many ways. He was terrific. He knew musicians. He cared about musicians. He knew a lot. He was a good musician himself, and he paid the bills for a lot of musicians who had problems.
He picked up their hospital bills, and they didn't even know it.
And without telling them, and they didn't know who it was.
Right. Well, I'll throw out another non sequitur, but it's just another great story. When you read both of your books, are full of these amazing stories of people that we think of as icons. But your godmother had Cole Porter's former apartment in Paris. That you lived there before you were asked to go get your own place, and you bought that barge. But you recounted a story that you were one day there, and you walk in, and there's Cole Porter in his silken bathrobe. Tell about meeting Cole Porter and then playing for him.
Well, Cole Porter was an amazing man, apparently. I mean, I wish I'd known him. He was in pain all the time from an accident that he had riding. And who can tell me where that was? The Piping Rock Club in Long Island. He was riding at the Piping, and he fell down, and it was terrible. Cracked his hip. It was he was that way the rest of his life, in pain. And he said to me, "Oh, Peter, your father played night and day. Would you play it for me?" And I froze. My knees got just, like that. I said, sure, and I went over and played night and day. It passed.
Are you picking him up better when he turns his head that way? Or is that my imagination? So do you want to just switch
You
that?
prefer me this?
Can you clip that? Let's just take a minute. Can you clip? Is it good? All right. It seemed like he's talking to the mic. What about you walked into somebody's apartment one day and there was Winston Churchill?
Where? No, that was, Winston Churchill was on a boat that we were supposed to go on and have dinner. And another guy and myself, were told by the owner of the boat, Winston Churchill is here. Maybe it's not right for you to come tonight. So we were rather pissed off, but we didn't go.
Oh, that's great. Well, you obviously, after your mother passed away in childbirth, your father did live until you were 12 years old, and you did have a good relationship with him. But you did live with a foster family, essentially, and of course, we all know who that was.
Well, yeah, it was the Harrimans, but because Mrs. Harriman was the best friend of my mother, and by the way, Mrs. Harriman was not Pamela, was
The original.
was Mary, and she was my mother's. They went to Spence together, and she was like a mother to me.
And you lived in Arden, was the name of the house there.
Yeah.
In Harriman, New York. And I believe you described in the book that it had the largest private pipe organ in the world. Is that true?
Well, it was kind of nuts.
Did you ever get your hands on that
But
keyboard?
don't forget, Abel was an extremely wealthy man at that time, and so I mean, he was involved in politics. He was involved. He went abroad to negotiate lend-lease and whatnot, and he was a very important diplomat.
Right.
Before he was governor and all that.
But even though that he served as a kind of a surrogate father, I won't say stepfather, because technically that's not true, but you still had a good relationship with your dad until his untimely passing.
Because he had a very good relationship with Mary and April. Very good. I do remember that one time I took Mary in Washington to hear a very good jazz musician. She was very interested in that person. And I think it was Dizzy Gillespie. And I looked at Averill and I saw him turn off his hearing aid. And so what I ran into when I saw Jack Kennedy, I said, you know, Averill turned off his hearing aid when he heard Dizzy Gillespie the other night. And the president said to me, he does that all the time in meetings.
I didn't see that in the book. See, you're getting stuff here that you're not going to get anywhere else. But, of course, there was that famous movie, the Eddie Duchin story, where you are depicted. And that was an award-winning film, because I think there's a scene of your dad in combat when he was in the army. Oh, that's another interesting thing. Your dad did not entertain the troops during the war. He decided to fight, didn't he?
No, he wanted to fight. He wanted to be one of the guys. He was in the Navy. He was on a destroyer overseas in the Pacific. And that was very important too.
And what did you think when you first saw that movie and how you were depicted in short pants and so forth? Did you get a kick out of it? Because you were right now at Yale, I believe, right?
Well, I was very interested that Kim Novak was my mother. And so I said to a couple of the pals at Yale, would you like to meet Kim Novak? And they said, God, yes, of course. So we drove down because I'd known that Kim was being shot in Central Park. They were doing a scene. So we talked our way into Central Park, and I saw Kim Novak under a tree being made up, you know, the brush, and the makeup man was there, and so I went over and put my arms around her from the back and kissed her on the neck. And she looked, oh shit. Because I said, hey Mom. Well, that was good.
Well, there are some pictures in this book of you and Kim dancing very cheek to cheek, I might add. So is that a little edible for you?
That's a song called Cheek to Cheek, you know that. Irving Berlin, yeah.
But now, a classic story is you go to Yale, you decide to take some time off and go to Paris. You're living with your godmother, who's in Cole Porter's former apartment that she bought from Cole Porter. House. And finally she says, Pete, I think it's time you get your own place. And you bought a barge with a couple of buddies.
I bought a barge for $2,000, 25. It was amazing. And I lived with Bob Silvitz, who was then the head of the Paris Review. And we had a wonderful time. Bob would be interviewing very serious people like Thornton Wilder. And I got to know the ladies who worked at the wonderful the
Crazy Horse Saloon?
At the Crazy Horse Saloon. I got to know the girls there, and I said, you know, would you like to take your breaks on the barge? And so they come over and take their breaks there. Well, Bob would be interviewing these very serious writers. And these girls would be smoking a joint and having, you know.
And George Plimpton was a frequenter. I heard he spent a few nights on that barge.
George Plimpton came by the barge all the time, and we let him sleep on a cot, an army cot we had. And he'd get up in the morning, and he'd walk up the street to the Plaza Athenæum Hotel, and he'd write home on the stationery. Say, Father, it's a little expensive here. Would you please send a little money?
And he's staying for free on your cot in your barge.
Yeah, sure. Damn right.
Well, there was a time when you had a visitor to the barge at 11 o'clock one morning after a night of good, clean fun. Tell us a little about that.
Well, I was having a wonderful time in Paris. Let's say I was playing jazz in a jazz club. I had a lot of friends. I was studying somewhat at the Sorbonne and at the École Normale. But I must say, I was just in heaven. It couldn't have been better for me. Well, one morning, about 11:30, I was sound asleep in bed with a young lady, and I was stark naked, and we didn't have a doorbell, or we didn't have a phone or anything, so you had to come on board if you wanted to see us. So I heard clump above my head. Somebody had jumped on board, and so I went and sort of pulled the hatch back and looked, and what I saw was some very well-shined black shoes, and then I looked at up legs that had, they were sort of in pinstripe, and I looked up to the top, and at the very top was Abel Harriman. And I mean, and he said, and I'm stark naked, by the way. And I'm going like this. I mean, believe me, you don't want to be naked in front of Abel Harriman. I mean, there's no way. And so Abel said, well, young man, and when are we going to finish Yale? I said, but Abe, I'm studying at the Sciences Politique. I'm doing this, I'm playing jazz. Abel said, well, I'll tell you when we're going to Yale. Boom, here's your ticket. In 3 weeks, you're going to be on it. And right now, get dressed and spruce up. Meet me at the Creole Bar. But I must say, that was...
What a killjoy he was.
That was a very shocking moment.
Oh, so you came back from your expatriate period and you graduated from Yale.
I did.
Bravo.
With honors, yeah.
With honors. There you go. And now you started to, I think you write that you decided while you were at Yale, even though you'd taken piano lessons and you hated practicing.
Oh, listen, it was before Yale, let me tell you. I took piano lessons when I was 5 years old. Abel sent word from Guadalcanal, wherever he was, from his boat. He sent word, I want Peter to have piano lessons. So I hated it. And I thought I wanted to play baseball. And so I thought, I didn't want to do that. So when I went to Hotchkiss, the guy at Hotchkiss, who was the head of the jazz band, said, Duchin, I hear you play piano. Would you please play with the jazz band? I said, hell no, I don't want to do that. And he said, well, let me just tell you that next weekend we're going to Miss Porter's school. And after that we're going to Emma Willard. And I said, yes, I'll play for you. So that was why I started playing.
But you write that but during Yale you really decided that you would make a career out of it, and you graduated, and you wrote that you said, to forestall having to get employment, I'll join the service, and I'll get them to send me to Paris, and I'll play the piano again, and you'll be right back over there. Well, that didn't work out too well, did it?
It didn't at all, no. Because I took the French exam and got 100%. In typical military logic, they sent me to Panama. And so I went to Panama and...
Playing the glockenspiel.
I played the glockenspiel, which is a terrible thing to play early in the morning, believe me, after drinking all night. Ding, 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 and you hold it like this. Anyway, terrible.
So, but you thought you could finagle your way back to Paris playing the piano.
Yeah, I did. Well, I did a lot of intelligence work in Panama, and well, it was great fun actually.
Right.
It was kind of weird.
But now you're done with the service, and it's time to get serious about putting together a band.
Right.
And I think you got together with a great guy at MCA, and you write about Swifty Lazar in the book. You're going to read this book. But it was decided that if you got this band together, you could get some work. You got a record contract for Decca Records.
Well, let me tell you how I did. My stepmother, when I was in Panama, my stepmother called and said that she was going out with a guy who was in Mexico City, and she very much loved him, and she said, do you have any time off? You'd come up and visit us. I said, sure. I think next weekend I could take a week off. So I took a week off, and I went to Mexico City and met my stepmother. And I said to her, listen, Chiquita, her name was, it is very important to me to get a date in here, a good-looking date, because I've been in Panama, for Christ's sake. And she said, people aren't good-looking there? And I said, no, it's not like that. I need a good-looking date. So what happened was we were sitting having drinks, and at about 10 o'clock, when people go out to dinner in Mexico City, an older woman walked in with jewels and whatnot, and I said, what the hell is happening? And I looked daggers at my stepmother, and she said, now here's your date. And I mean, the hatred I felt for this woman at that moment, it was just terrible. So she said, it's Maria Lopez Figueroa. So, well, what happened was after dinner, and I drank a little bit, and I was not particularly nice to Maria Lopez, and I hated my stepmother, hated. And after dinner, Maria Lopez Figueroa said, oh, Peter, I have a car outside. We'll go, you come with me. And I thought, what do I have to do something to this woman? I mean, a mercy? What is this? It's a terrible thing. So I got in the car with her. We drove out to the outside of Mexico City, where she pulled in front of a low building that was very unusual looking. We walked in the front door. There was a bar and a long picture of a nude over the bar. And she said, let's have a drink. And I said, okay. So I sat down at the bar to have a drink. And the minute I sat down, 3 of the most beautiful women I've ever seen in my life appeared next to me, etc. And she said, and Maria said, holding out her hand, I just want to say goodnight to you. And I looked at her kind of oddly, and there was a wad of bills in her hand. And she said, your stepmother said, to come back whenever you feel like it. And so that was a very nice date, I must say. And not only that, but I noticed over in the corner a bald head that looked rather familiar. And I walked over to see, and damned if it wasn't Jay Rutherford. And with him was Angie Duke. And I said, Angie, how are you? And Angie said, don't you know never to recognize somebody in a place like this? But, so that was that. Anyway.
Well, you earned that being in Panama for all that time. You earned a good night on the time. I think you earned that. But obviously, on the heels of the success of the Eddie Duchin story, there was interest in this young Peter Duchin. The record companies signed you to a deal. You got a band together, but you hadn't played live. The record was a big success, but now you had to go and play live, and you managed to get this gig at the St. Regis, which was a milestone.
Well, I was again in Mexico visiting Chiquita, and she took me out to dinner, and we drank a little bit, and it got a little late, and I saw a piano in the corner, and I sort of tinkled away, and this man came up in a double-breasted suit and slicked down hair, and he said, "You know, I can help you." I thought, what the hell is he trying to do? Is he sell me his sister or something? You know, I had no idea. And he said, "I'll tell you why I can help you. I own the St. Regis Hotel in New York." I said, "Oh, that's interesting. And yes, you can help me." And so he said, "Call me when you get out of the Army." So we did, and we made a deal. And that was my first big job at the St. Regis.
The opening night was a smash. Everybody turned out, and for a number of two or 3 years after that, one regular at the place was Salvador Dali. He would come in there.
Well, there were a lot of regulars in that place. No, it was. There were a lot of famous people who went. My wife came to the place, and it was a wonderful place, amazing that.
And about this time, did you get your apartment above Carnegie Hall? Was this about
That's
that
right.
time?
Yeah.
That must have been a great place to live.
It was a fantastic place for a bachelor because right down the hall was a ballet studio. And so I just left the door open when I was practicing the piano. And if anybody poked their head in, "Yes, you can change here if you want." You know, whatever.
They were in training to get jobs over at the Crazy Horse in Paris.
Sure.
Wasn't Bobby Short one of your neighbors in there?
And Don Shirley.
Don Shirley.
Who was in the Green.
That great movie that won the Oscar, the Green Mile?
Green Book.
The Green Book, of course. So that was exciting.
Well, speaking of Don Shirley, I mean, he was flaming gay, and he wore caftans and God knows what. Namely, then a guy that worked in the building said, "Peter, I found out a very interesting thing, and that is there's a great air conditioning duct that you can crawl in, and you can get from here, meaning 7th Avenue, to the top area of Carnegie Hall and hear all the concerts." I said, "Fantastic." And I went there and heard Bob Dylan and different people. It was really cool. I got out and I said this to John Shirley. "Listen, this is amazing. You just get in free." And he said, "God, it must be filthy." And I said, "Well, if you take off your goddamn mufti and take off all this stuff that you're wearing, don't worry about it." He never did. But that was, Carnegie Hall was great.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, your career was really launched with the gig at the St. Regis. And over the years, you have played the White House for presidents. You've played all kinds of things. People have asked you at the Piping Rock, they asked you what was the worst job you've ever played. I'm not going to ask you that question because we don't want to hear about it.
The worst job.
But we'd like to hear about some of your most memorable engagements, if you don't mind.
Well, I'll tell you what the best job I played, which is as opposed to the worst. I got a call in the office from Chicago, a lady in Chicago who said, "Mr. Duchin, would you possibly be free, blah?" And I was. And she said, "We'd like you to play for our 50th anniversary, my husband and I." And I said, "Okay, it's at the Palmer House. Fine, terrific." So we go to Chicago with the band, and I helped the band set up at about 4 in the afternoon. And I look around. The weird thing is it's not in the grand ballroom. It's in the smaller ballroom. And so I look there, and I come down at 7 o'clock, and we're all set up and whatnot. But there's one table there, and I figured they must be coming in for cocktails or something. And there was a table, and at 7 o'clock, this absolutely ravishing, beautiful couple walked in the door, and he was in white tie and tails, and she was jewels and beautifully dressed, and she walks over to the piano and introduces both of them to me and said, Mr. Duchin, we have many friends. This is our anniversary, but we just thought that what we'd like to do is dance to you, have a 5-course meal, and if you'll play between courses, it would just be perfect. And she said, but please don't get bored. And I said, I won't be bored, for God's sake. It's the most lovely thing. And that was the best party I ever played, because there were just the two of them. And what could be better? So any of you can give that, you got it.
Well, Peter, there's so much to unpack. I read your original book in '96. I read this one, it was given to me, and then this last weekend I reread Ghost of a Chance. So I think I know more about you now than I ever want to know. But it's a fascinating story of some of the most amazing figures of our time, all wrapped through your lens and the story. So I urge you to get it. Now, there's 2 other books that you wrote. One is called Good Morning Heartache, and the other is called Blue Moon. They're novels, right?
Yeah.
We got to put a plug in for those.
Why not?
Now, those are kind of mystery novels?
Well, they're mysteries, yeah. There's a guy who plays piano. Guess who he's like?
Is this a Ramana Clef?
And modeled on. And there's a guy who plays piano, and he solves murders and mysteries.
There you go.
Why not? I mean, that means you can have anybody murdered you want.
Now tell us, when and how did you meet your wonderful wife, Virginia?
Oh, we met when I was at the Maisonette, and she came to meet me and to be a model in a photograph for Vogue. Oh. And we've known each other ever since.
And how long have you been married now?
Well,
You better come up with this, otherwise you're in big trouble. Well, I do want to quickly touch on your second wife, Brooke Hayward, because there's some fascinating stuff that goes on between, and you've got to explain this to me, because it involves Newport and Paris and that apartment that Cole Porter owned, and you both had the same stepmother, and you had all of these. Can you summarize it better than I just did?
Well, let's say I'm now married to my present wife.
But
only.
But I believe that Pamela Harriman was once married to Leland Hayward.
Pamela Harriman was married to Leland Hayward. She was a woman I did not like.
So we can leave it there then. A lot of us might be going to the dinner that we have for you, and we wanted to get some time to let people answer questions. And there's one thing, I said, Peter, is there anything off limits? And he said, absolutely not, as you just heard. He calls it as he sees it. And I think there's a microphone if some people have some questions.
Do you have any
I think
questions?
Julia has a mic, so you can come around. Does anybody have some questions? And I know that Peter will autograph some books in the back. We have one right there.
So can you tell us more about Memoir?
What was that?
They want more on Pamela Harriman, but it's up to you.
More about her. She was incredibly. Read Haywire by Brooke Haywood, and you will find out more about Pamela Harriman. She was, I think, the most focused person I've known on helping herself, and to the detriment of other people. It's hard for me to answer that question. But
Well, I know that there is a pointed scene in the book where you, I think you called you called Ave to say that you were getting married to Brooke. And Pamela got on the phone and said, "Oh, that's so delightful," even though Brooke had written some quite disparaging remarks about Pamela.
well, I'll tell you one story about Abel and Pamela. After they got married, they went to Washington because he had been told by her that she wouldn't go to Washington with him unless they were married. So they went to Washington, and his business guy, he had an appointment with the business guy, which he hated. And the business fellow came in, and at the end of the meeting, he said, "Well, Governor, should we still be sending Mrs. Harriman, the $50,000 check that we've been sending?" And he said, $50,000? What are you talking about? And she said, "Well, we've been sending it since 1942. And that tells you something.
Any other questions? We go with this fellow. I saw this fellow first.
April Harriman is a fascinating man.
I agree.
I wonder, having been the six people that are talked about as being the wise men,
The wise men, yeah.
how much of that you encounter, the brilliance of that particular man within that group?
Well,
The question is that he was one of the 6 wise men. Who are the others? Can you list them?
there were George Kennan, Chip Bolin, who? Yeah, John McCloy. And Dean
Is
Atchison.
it about the Marshall Plan? Putting together the Marshall Plan?
I encountered a lot. I mean, you saw that about
The
Abel.
Marshall Plan.
I mean, Abel was a big man. You didn't play with him. He was a big man. He didn't have much of a sense of humor, but he was very bright in a bridge-like way. He played bridge brilliantly. And he, as Jack Kennedy said about him, you can send Abel on any mission and you just prescribe the areas that he can work within, and he'll never exceed or go beyond those areas. So he's very, very, very critical. And he was, I'll tell you Churchill's story. He and Churchill were having dinner one night, before dinner at Checkers, and they wanted a martini. And Churchill said, "Well, it's in the liquor cabinets over there, April." and Abel couldn't find the vermouth. And so Abel said, well, there's no vermouth here. And Churchill said, oh God, just use some Madeira.
We have a question over here.
Peter, you have 3 beautiful, talented children. What have you learned about life from being a father or from your children directly?
What have I learned about life?
From being a father.
In 2 words?
From being a father. What have you learned from life from being a father?
From being a father, carpe diem. Seize the day. I think teach your children what you believe in.
Do you have any grandchildren?
You
have any grandchildren?
Yeah, I have grandchildren, and I have 4 grandchildren, and some in college and all that kind of stuff.
That's great. Any other questions? Well, there are some books that are there to be signed if you'd like to pick up a copy. I also urge you to go out and get Ghost of a Chance.
Okay.
And those great things. Some will be going to the dinner afterwards, and so there'll be an opportunity to chat further with Peter. This has been a total delight. He's got, I think we see what a great sense of humor, a great joie de vivre, and Virginia has been so helpful. But you have come through, my friend. The rumors of your demise are very exaggerated.
Thank you very much.
The cash register is open.
Thank you all very much. The books are over here for sale.